U of L football is only 18 days away from kickoff against Ohio. To help prepare you for what is sure to be an exciting season, we'll break down the schedule into 3 parts. First, the Cards start with these games. See the schedule here: Ohio, EKU, at Kentucky there with the Governor's Cup, and Florida International. As you look at those opponents, it's interesting. Kentucky comes from the biggest conferences. Mark Ennis joins me here to talk about this. Ohio has probably the best resume, frankly, of those 4. They got votes in the top 25. You think Ohio, well, how tough could that be? Well, it could be tough.
Yeah, and over the last couple of years, MAC schools have made waves against sort of the bigger conference schools, and Ohio won at Penn State in the season opener. Last year, returned a senior quarterback. They run an offense you don't see a lot of, kind of a pistol option, look. So, yeah, I think it will be a little bit of a challenge, at least early for Louisville.
And let's not forget, Ohio beat Kentucky a few years back. They went into Commonwealth Stadium, probably been about 10 years now, and did that. And Ohio, again, you're right. The MAC gets overlooked because frankly, the names don't sound that intimidating. Right. Ohio, University, or Ohio U, whatever they don't want to be called. But it's of those, as you look at Ohio, you can't just overlook them, I guess, is the point being. And a lot of people expect them to win that game by 30 points, even though I think they're like a 16-point favorite.
Hey, it's a good opening opponent. It's better than Murray or somebody else that they have typically opened the season with. I think it's an opponent that you can reasonably tell your players, if you're a coach, these guys need to be respected.
Looking at the other teams in that, I mean, obviously, when you break it down into force like this, there's no question. You mentioned Ohio. It's the opener. It's the first game you talk about. Kentucky, September 14th, is the game that the state thinks about most of the offseason, even whether it's first or whether it's third. Louisville figures still to be a huge favorite in that game, even though the game is at Kentucky.
Yeah, it will know so much more after week 1, after we get a chance to see, really, especially in talking about Kentucky, when we get to see them play one game in that opener against Western, we'll know so much more and I think have a lot better feel for how that Louisville-Kentucky game will go after we just get to see them play one time.
And we've seen in this rivalry, I mean, if a team has a lot on the line, a team comes into that game really good. We've seen it happen a couple of times. Both times been to Louisville to wreck the BCS game where Ragone was the quarterback and the Stevie Johnson play. Both times Louisville ranked highly. Kentucky in those scenarios, they have played, I don't know, say season spoiler, but certainly aspiration spoiler times in the series.
Yeah, and even at times where we thought Louisville really didn't match up particularly well. Steve Kragthorpe's last year in 2009, if Trent Guy doesn't drop the punt, they win that game. And that was really the worst of his Louisville teams, and they were still in that game. So there's really no reason to think it won't become, something of a competitive game.
As we're breaking this down into thirds, so let's get a look at the second third of the schedule, the second 4 games on it. And this is where you get into the conference play. They take on Temple October 5th, followed by a Thursday home matchup against Rutgers, and then Central Florida, that's on a Friday night, before traveling to Tampa to take on South Florida. The Temple, I basically discount. The others, though, I don't necessarily. Let's start with Rutgers, a team that, let's face it, had the Cards dead in the water last year until Teddy Bridgewater decided he was going to put on his Superman pajamas and come off the bench.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, that game at Papa John's on a Friday night was a wonderful game that Louisville really was kind of lucky to get out of because Mark Harrison dropped that what would have been a long go-ahead touchdown. And you're looking at that schedule, that's a game on 5 days rest. They play Temple and they come home and then have to play on a Thursday. So that will be a tough game for Louisville in what I think is the toughest of the 3 parts of the schedule.
Yeah, Rutgers, as mentioned, probably thought of the other teams in the AAC. I guess you'd put them Cincinnati. Probably thought as the second best team. Rutgers, probably right there. South Florida, though, is a team that if I'm reminded of this once, I'm reminded of it 10 times by callers, by anybody else. They never play well down there at Tampa. I don't know what it is, but it is a true statement that down there at Tampa has not been the best of areas for the Cards to travel, although they did win there a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think that will be a more difficult game than maybe people realize. South Florida's going to have an extremely good defensive line. A couple of players that probably will play in the pros there, and we know Willie Taggart is a good coach. So I think that will be a more difficult game than maybe people realize.
Tougher game, Central Florida or South Florida in your mind?
I think it probably will be South Florida because it's on the road. Louisville gets 8 days to rest for UCF, and that's a home game. I think they'll be okay there.
And then let's look at the last stretch for the Louisville Cardinals, the last 4 games at UConn versus Houston versus a Memphis team that figures to be brutal, if anybody, believe any of the things you read about the Memphis team. But, I mean, when you look at that last component of it, Cincinnati will get to them. I guess let's start with UConn because it is at UConn. I think these A lot of times you don't know what to expect from teams like a UConn. They're never that bad. They're never that good, it seems like. They're always right there, and obviously they beat the Cards last year.
Yeah, and Louisville never, goes up there and blows them away, and that will be a road game this year. Last they lost a lot of the NFL caliber players, and they did have a bunch on that defense last year that really gave Louisville fits, maybe more than anybody else last year. So a lot of those guys are going to be gone, but still Louisville does never seem to go up there and play well, especially when it's cold.
Talk about the Cincinnati game. As you look at it, when they go to play Cincinnati, do you think the conference title will be on the line in that game? It's the last game of the regular season. Do you think that the conference will be wrapped up by then, or will that game be for all the marbles?
The Big East and now the AAC, they've been good at doing this over the years, setting it up to where that last
you're right. It is a good skill.
I mean, they're good at this, and I don't see any reason why either one of these teams really should have more than one loss to where this game will be the deciding game. No, I think it will. And for as much as people talk about Louisville maybe going undefeated, if you look at Cincinnati's schedule, they have every bit as good of an opportunity to do the same thing. You could have both teams not just playing for the title, but being undefeated in that game. I think that's reasonable.
And they have circled that game. I mean, we're talking up at the AAC Media Days. If you asked a Cincinnati player about Louisville, they knew the date of the game. You didn't have to go late in the season. They knew December 5th. That's when that game is.
Yeah, and that's a Tommy Tuberville special. His career winning games against highly ranked teams, maybe when people don't expect it, but at Auburn and Texas Tech both, he's done this more than once in his career.
Tuberville will be an interesting mix-up there to see how things go with him. But as you look at it, you look at that schedule, what would you rank as the toughest game on it?
I still think Rutgers is the most difficult game on. I really do. I have questions about Cincinnati because you mentioned the coaching turnover.
Sure.
I don't know what kind of coordinator Eddie Grant is going to be calling plays. I knew Butch Jones was good, but I don't know about that. But I think that Rutgers game, they recruit well as Louisville really has. And I think that will be the toughest game on 5 days rest.
Mark, always good to catch up with you. Mark Guinness from ESPN 680 joining us here on the show. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow for a one-on-one with four-star small forward Trayvon Blewett. And if you're not familiar with that name, well, you will soon be soon. Remember, you can watch CNN2 Sports anytime on demand. Just look for the local tab, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook for all the latest videos and interviews with your favorite sports celebrities from the Bluegrass.